What is it that makes for good preaching? What is it that really transacts what God wants to do in people's lives? To be able to speak is an act of leadership. To be able to preach is an act of spiritual leadership. Well, here's the first thing I really think anyone starting out preaching has got to know. Firstly, know what you're going to say. In fact, I encourage young preachers who are starting out to answer simple questions before they preach in one sentence. The first sentence that I want to hear is, tell me in one sentence, what are you going to say? That's it. Just one sentence. And if they can't put it in one sentence, they're really not ready to preach. Secondly, here's the next question. Why are you preaching this? And here's the third question, which I want a one sentence answer to. When people have heard you preach, what do you want them to do? That's it. Answer those in one sentence. In fact, if you're a pastor trying to develop and mentor young preachers in your church, you may want to ask them those three questions and have them really think about it. And what that does is exactly that. It gets them thinking in what we call concise and precise ways. Because the worst thing is when someone who's not accustomed to preaching, they get up and they get lost. They just completely get lost in the haze. So answering those three questions are perhaps the place to start. The other thing too, if you're a pastor and you're giving someone a go and you're mentoring them in preaching, I would strongly suggest give them a time frame. Now, if you don't have the gift of having a pastor give you that time frame, set a time frame. It's an amazing thing when you stand behind a pulpit in front of people with notes in front of you and you're not aware of a clock. It's amazing how fast time goes for you. And it seems like you've been there just a matter of minutes, and in fact you've been there maybe 40, 50 minutes. But it'll just go like that. And I guess it's something to do with the adrenaline that's pumping through you. So this is what I strongly recommend. In fact, I will, in a mentoring session with young preachers, I'll say, get a watch. Get a watch, put it right in front of you so you can see it. If you haven't got a watch, what I'll do is I'll take them into our church auditorium. I'm in my office right now, and I go through a couple of rooms and I get to our auditorium. And in our auditorium, we've got a great big clock. It's a red digital clock, and it's a bit of a shelf in front of it. It's about 6 meters up in the air, so those in the congregation can't readily see it, but the preacher can. And one of the things I will say to people is just take note. Just look at that time when you start, and take note when your allocated time is up. So just remember, whenever you're starting out, you're not going to have all the skills ready to preach that you'll have in a few years' time if you keep taking these opportunities and using them. So give yourself an allocated time. That time might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes, it might be 20 minutes. If you are confident that you can do 20 minutes, then you definitely should go 10. Just take that 10 minutes. And so this is just another tip too. You may already be an experienced preacher. Can I just point out that whenever I have a guest speaker come to my church, the professional ones will say, what's my allocated time? And I will say it's X. And X could be 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And there's a number of variables in there as a pastor that I'm using to determine that time. The last thing I want them to do is to tell me, well, okay, can you tell me when my time is up as I'm preaching? And my answer is always no. And it's no, because if you ask me how much time you've got, then you're responsible to manage that. So if your pastor gives you 10 minutes, take that 10 minutes and use it well. It may be that you've been asked to share a communion message in the church service. Don't talk about world missions in China. Don't talk about whatever is unrelated to this topic. Just simply talk about this issue. And this is one of the mistakes I made with my first sermon. Man, I was trying so hard. I tried so hard. I tried too hard. That's the reality of it. I tried too hard. And I thought more is better. I thought the more I say, the more scriptures I give, the more words I can put into this thing, the better it will be. And I discovered, and I have since discovered, that's not true. Sometimes the most profound things are in the most concise words. I heard Ernest Hemingway, one of the few men that has won Nobel Prize for Literature and the Pulitzer Prize for Literature, once was in a bar, and the tragedy of his life, of course, and someone came up to him and said, "You're Ernest Hemingway. I've heard that you can say so much with just a few words. Could you tell me a story with just a few words?" And he said, "Yes, I could tell you a story in 6 words." And everyone in the bar hushed, and Ernest Hemingway told this famous 6-word story. I remember the first time I shared that story I've got 3 daughters, and I shared it with each of my daughters over the years to make this point as well. I think the first time I shared it with my oldest daughter, Ebony, I think she cried. And I remember when I shared it with my next daughter, Zoe, I could see she was moved. When Ernest Hemingway shared this story, people in the bar began to cry. Here's his story. For sale. Baby shoes. Never worn. Ponder that story. And that's brilliant because he's let you fill in the blanks. He's let you realize there's a tragedy behind those 6 words. And there's a tragedy that deeply affected someone enough to sell their baby shoes. So, be concise. Answer that question. What are you going to say? Secondly, why are you saying it? And thirdly, what do you want people to do? Not to know, to do. That's preaching. To do when they've heard what you have to say. That's where you start. So, go out, have a go. Make mistakes. As you go out and have a go, you'll realize what one preacher once said, when I was very young, he said, Andrew, there's always 3 sermons. There's always 3 messages. There's the one you prepare. There's the one you give. And there's the one you wish you'd given. So remember that and learn from it. And from that, I want to come back and I want to talk about how we can put some structure into the time frame that you are given to preach your sermon.